Good afternoon and welcome to Englewood Christian Church, where this afternoon at this time we are gathering together to celebrate the life of Frank Coburn. A faithful servant, a lover of God, one who touched the lives of many in various different parts of our world. And we come to give thanks and to remember, to tell some stories, and pause to remember the one who gives us life in its fullness. We come into this place where Frank and Bev worshiped for many years, where Frank was part of the choir and they served and shared life. So it is only fitting and appropriate that we gather in this place today, recognize the presence of the holy, and to place in the arms of God the life and love of Frank Coburn. I invite you to share with me as you are able, to stand as you are able, and sing this hymn of joy and of faith. Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, as we begin. Would you please stand as you are able? Let us pray. You who were from the beginning, you who breathed into us the breath of life, and you are one who holds our hand and our last breath. You are the giver of all. We pause this afternoon to remember the life of Frank Coburn, one of your children, one of your saints. May that which we say and do today honor you and honor Frank, his life, the relationships we've had. So surround the words that are said, the songs that are sung, the thoughts that are shared. May they be holy in your sight. Amen. You may be seated. We're going to have some family and friend members come and share reflections, but I want to highlight something before. There should be a half sheet of paper in your program bulletin, and it says, "My Memories of Frank." So you are free to sit and scribble and write throughout this service. If you've got some stories or memories of Frank that you want to put down there, go right ahead, and then those put them on the basket out in narthex, or give them to one of the family members. They would appreciate hearing some other stories as well. And at the close of the service, we'll be going into the fellowship hall. Lots of refreshments there, some pictures to see, and tell some more stories together. So at this time, I think oldest son Jim is up to bat first.
I would be better at this if I'd finished my pastoring degree, but decided that wasn't what I was. So, I'm Jim Coburn, oldest son remaining of Frank Coburn, and I'm here to tell you about my dad. My dad, like he wrote, my dad. First, I want to tell you about his answered prayer. In 2017, he and Mom moved to living care. We were there for a year. We went to spring training together. We had fun stuff, and he had a good time. And then in 2018, he had the worst year of his life. His wife died in January, and he caught shingles in April. And it profoundly impacted his life from then on. He was eventually almost totally blind, very hard of hearing, and surviving day by day with huge help from Roger. And I'd come over periodically and help him with his eye drops and walk around the living care walkway and stuff like that. But he was tired at the end of living, and he would go to bed night after night after night and say, "Father, I'm ready to come home. Take me in my sleep." And then he'd wake up and he'd say, "I guess you didn't take me in my sleep, so let's live another day." And eventually, he had a medical emergency where he had to go in the emergency room in Yakima Memorial, I think it's still called. And we had all three brothers helping out because he had moved to assisted living level where he needed someone with him 24/7, right? And I came and helped and was communicated with my wife on the phone. Dad's assisted living level, we're struggling, and she said, bring Dad home. Bring him home. And we got to have 4 months, 2 days, some of the best 4 months of my life with my dad, living in our care. And he responded well. He got better, he got stronger, he was exercising every day, he was eating food. He got challenged by Dr. Sevatello, our doctor over there, 6'4", big guy. He grabbed my dad on the thigh and he said, "Mister, I want you to put some muscle on these bones." And he did. He gained 6 pounds in a month, and then he had an upper GI incident, and he spewed forth blood. A bad day for me. And took him to the hospital in Mount Get closer. Okay. Took him to the hospital in Mount Vernon, and from there he went on to hospice in our house. We were the caregivers, my wife and I, for my daddy for his last 5 weeks. And he was steady, and then steady, and then at the very end, and then he was just breathing. I mean, he had 3 days, I didn't know the body could do this, of just breathing. Sleeping, breathing, and then his prayer was answered. While asleep, he was breathing, and then he either wasn't breathing or he was breathing on the other side. I don't know what we do in heaven, but he just stopped breathing. No heart attack, no pain, no anguish, nothing. He was just with us, and then he was with Jesus. And so, answer to his prayer. Well, my daddy was born in Lehigh, Iowa, on February 23rd, 1927, to the Reverend and Mrs. Walter and Harriet Coburn. And he was in Lehigh because that's where Grandpa was preaching. Preaching in Lehigh, and Dad is born, and Grandma said, and she was an honest woman, she told my dad, you were supposed to be born on the 22nd, but I did not let you. I kept from going to labor. I refused you being born on February 22. You were born on February 23 because your name is James Franklin Coburn, not George. So they did that for a while, and then went in back when the Depression hit. Grandma and Grandpa took their 5 children, and they moved back to Coburn's Corner, Indiana, which is just outside of St. Joe, north and east of Fort Wayne, in case you're going there. Across the Ohio border from Hicksville. And they lived on the farm with his 2 uncles, oldest brother Floyd, then Walter, and then Kenny. Floyd and Walter would go with Dad to church, and maybe he'd learn his church songs, and then Kenny would go to the local bar, and he'd have a good time, and then he'd come back and he'd teach Frank bar songs. So Dad knew his church songs and his bar songs, and he was really good at both. Okay. Then, and leaving there, Grandpa gets a job. He's preaching again, but this time it's in western Indiana, where Dad had to leave his nice big school where he was practicing and learning the violin, go to a tiny little school where there weren't very many educational opportunities, and did his best to finish, but was also working with Uncle Charlie. Uncle Charlie was not biological uncle, but just a regular uncle, and was working with Uncle Charlie at the farm and forgetting to go to school. Okay, so the truant officer goes and talks to the Reverend Coburn. He says, Reverend Coburn, your son, Frank, is going to not make it through school because he's been absent so many times. So then Grandpa goes to my dad, who's like 15 or 16, and he looks up at him, because Dad's bigger than Grandpa, and he says, Franklin, you are bigger than me, but I'm going to beat you up if you don't go to school. And then my dad says, he went, well, I think Dad's serious about this. I think I'll go to school, and finish school okay, and jumped into the Navy, because graduated, 17-year-old boy, June of 44, jumped in the Navy, spent 1 year, 7 months, 11 days in the Navy, was exited out honorably in 1946 at the Great Lakes Naval Station with an honorable discharge and a $100 in bonus for having been such a good sailor. He made aviation mechanical mate 3rd or something. He did good. He was training to be a gunner in the airplane that was sunk, that President Bush was flying in, that got shot down. So, not a good job. Okay, so he's in that where usually the pilot survives. Maybe somebody else might if he's able to turn it up and you jump out. But many of them got shot down because they slow down, get ready to drop that torpedo and then, or bomb, and then take off. So, thanks be to God, the war ended before my dad got over there, okay? And he was around to pursue his dream of becoming a missionary. So to do that, he had to go into Butler University, that's in Indianapolis, Indiana, and pursue the dream of, I think, maybe summer camp somewhere. I meant to sit down and say, Dad, where'd you get the crazy idea to be a missionary in Congo, right? But I forgot to ask him that. But he's got this dream, and a young lady, same age, my mom, had a similar dream. I'm going to marry that boy and go be a missionary wherever he goes. And so they were engaged for 4 years before they got married because we had to get the degree before we could get married. Jim? Oh, okay, Dad. Sure. They went then from Butler. Mom was at Indianapolis University getting her nursing degree, and also at the Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis. Then it goes from there to New Hampshire, where the Disciples of Christ had a missionary finishing school or something in the 50s. It goes to New Hampshire, and then they went to Brussels, Belgium, where they had French finishing because they were going to Belgium Congo. Okay, so they goes there, and my sister Janice is born at Brussels. And then we go to the Congo, and Congo from 1956 to 1964 with 1 year furlough. In 1961, where I got to go to first grade in Indianapolis, Indiana, the only white boy in the class, you know. My dad apologized to me later. Said, you know, we were really poor. We couldn't afford to live anywhere else. You were the only white kid in the class. I said, really? I didn't know that, you know. And I mean, I was used to hanging out with Congolese kids, you know, so it didn't make any difference to me. But we go to Congo, and he's having his best job ever, either that one or FEMA. Those are the two that are his best. And he's working there, and then there's a civil war. People are we're forced to leave. Once we leave, we have to come back somewhere. We come back to Indiana. Best place I ever lived, like back, Grandma and Grandpa, Allie, my house. You know, I loved that place. But that's in Garrett, Indiana. We had to go somewhere, so where are we going to go? How about to the Disciples of Christ gathering at Louisville, Kentucky, to meet with everybody, and a friend, Bill Clark, says, and this is, I'm paraphrasing, so the Clarks might have a slightly different story, but Frank, we have a position for you in White Swan at the Log Church. You can be there and be the pastor of the Log Church. And he's like, I'm not a pastor. I'm not really a pastor. That's not really who I am, you know. And it's like, yeah, but it's an outreach. So you can kind of be like an outreach to the Yakima Nation and pastor of the Log Church. So he comes there 2.5 years. He survives and does well, I think, until he became the first director of the Sundown Inn Ranch at the former Yakima Indian Christian Mission, and worked that. Might have worked it till he retired, except Jim Oldham, his boss, was overseeing what he was doing, and it was his pet project, and he was there with him all the time. And Frank says, Jim, either let me do my job and you leave, or fire me. And he says, Frank, you're fired. It may not have worked exactly like that, but he fired him. So then Dad jumps into other things. I mean, he was canning fruit, and then he was a probation officer. I didn't like that job too much when I was a little teenage kid. What's your dad do? Well, he's the PO, you know. So he did that for a little while. Went back to Indiana, got an MSW from Indiana University, Purdue University Institute. Indiana people don't know what that is. It's IUPUI, and got that MSW. Came back. Got that at age 47. Came back and jumped into social working. Retired from that in 1992. That's social working, 18 years, retired. Enough said. And I jumps into retirement of bicycles, grandkids, family, always Beverly. My mom and my dad were still united. So they moves to Sela, they moves to living care. He has incidents medical-wise, and then he comes and he lives with me. Comes back to my house, and it's there that his prayer was answered. He got to go home. His good shepherd, if you'll notice, Psalm 23 is on this bulletin, his psalm, and others can share it, but it's my dad's psalm. And his good shepherd came and took him home through the valley of the shadow of death. That's my dad.
Support.
I'm Roger. I'm the fourth son, and this is my beautiful wife, Kim, up here for
I'm just up here for moral support.
moral support. It is my spot. I can't ad lib like Jim does. First of all, I owe everything I am to my dad. He made me the person I am today, but there are two instances in particular that Dad did for me to make me who I am. First, he taught me how to swim. If it weren't for my dad, I never would have learned how to swim. Before I turned 5 years old, Dad had me swimming in the Congo River. He knew that I loved the water. So as long as we were going to live by a river, he made sure that I knew how to swim. Little did I know at the time, though, that it would lead me to a competitive swimming and coaching career that lasted over 40 years of my life. Both Mom and Dad's support during these early years were crucial. All the carpool rides to and from practices, all the dinners kept warm in the oven, all the swim meets we traveled to, and of course all the expenses that came along with the sport. Second, if it weren't for my dad, I never would have went back to school to get my education degree. Thanks to his wisdom and foresight, he realized I wasn't going anywhere with the dead-end job I had at Nordic Nautilus. He convinced me to go back to school and finish what I had started. Luckily, though, while I was at Nordic Nautilus, I met my future and beautiful wife, Kim. I was so lucky. Thanks to my dad, my education degree and my swimming background led me to a teaching and swim coaching job at Unalaska City School District in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, a remote little community at the end of the Aleutian Islands, 850 miles south of Anchorage. There I taught PE, health, and coached the high school swim team, all because of my dad. The 8 years we spent in Dutch Harbor were a wonderful adventure and experience for our beginning family. On our return to Washington, I later finished my coaching career for the Yakima YMCA in 2020. But if it weren't for my dad, none of that would have happened. Dad started from humble beginnings himself, but before he was through, he made a pretty good living or life for himself and his family. But there's an old adage that says behind every successful man there's a good woman. And that was certainly true here. Mom and Dad were soulmates. They were perfect for each other. Mom was always the one who took care of all the planning and shopping for all the upcoming birthday parties, kids' sporting events and concerts and graduations and Christmas, etc. She made sure no one was forgotten and made a wonderful matriarch. Dad, on the other hand, was the practical one who managed the finances and was as frugal as he could be. Growing up during the Depression will do that to you. But he would bite his lip and let Mom spend whatever she felt was necessary to ensure that her children or grandchildren or whoever else's life event was remembered and celebrated. And the meals they made to celebrate, a lot of those events were amazing. Talk about good old-fashioned homegrown Hoosier cooking. Dad was the master chef while Mom was the master baker. What a combo. But sadly, very sadly, shortly after they moved into the Living Care Retirement Center on 40th and Summitview, Mom passed away in January of 2008. Dad was devastated and lost without her. It ruined his plans for a relaxing and carefree retirement for both of them. She was everything to him, not to mention his nurse. She was there to help him through the traumatic experience of losing his right eye in a carpentry accident and nursed him back to health, but she was there no more. He had lost his beloved wife of 66 years. Living Care was supposed to be the final pleasant chapter for their golden years. Dad was such a planner. No more house to clean or repairs to make or yard work to do. Just enjoy each other's company and live their golden years together in comfort. But Mom wasn't there anymore. And then 4 months later, in April of 2018, Dad got shingles. The doctors and nurses said it was one of the worst cases they had ever seen. The shingles attacked the right side of his face and took most of his sight from his one remaining eye. While in the full care unit of living care, Dad said he prayed to the Lord several times to take him. The symptoms and pains were overwhelming, and he described the pain as if someone were pressing a hot iron to his face for several minutes at a time, not to mention the constant headaches. He was ready to go. Mom was gone. His sight was gone. He was still dealing with complications from shingles. And then on top of all of that, COVID hit. And he was isolated even more. It would have been so easy for him to just give up. But he kept on for us, 5 years. He was so unselfish. I don't think he realized, though, just how strong his body was. I still marvel at the fact that he rode his bike across the country 4 times, all between the ages of 65 and 81. He was truly amazing. He will always be my hero. If I can live my life to be half the man he was, I will be truly blessed. I love you, Dad.
Mm-hmm.
Hi everybody, I'm Joe. I've always shared a special bond with Grandpa, which starts from my name. I'm James Coburn III, and also the third to not go by James. Frank, Jim, and Joseph, respectively. Aside from names, Grandpa and I shared multiple things. 2 of them combined specifically baseball and clumsiness when we were at a baseball game, a Mariners game, about 20 years ago. And I was riding on his shoulder, we were running through, and then the inning was starting. So he had to get us right back to our seats. And he didn't check the clearance of the seats above us. And I went forehead to concrete so quick, all the way along. And I remember falling down, crying, trying to run away, and Dad and Grandpa were like, "We gotta go, the game's going on." Another thing that we shared is a love for bicycling. As you all know, he biked the country 4 times. When he was 81 and I was 15, him and I and Dad biked the Seattle to Portland, which is a 2-day bike ride, Seattle to Portland. I was a spry cross-country runner, and Grandpa wiped the floor with me. I had nothing to do, 81 years old. Yeah. Any of us could stand here and regale you with all kinds of stories and great memories of him. From his beautiful and always family-focused celebrations for all the different holidays, to him taking his eye out just to scare all of his grandkids, to freak us out, one of my favorite things. He was at all of our graduations, he was at all of our parties, all of our weddings. He was that kind of guy. He cared about his kids, his grandkids, his wife, his community, and he put everyone first. He cared about him his whole life, but he still managed to squeeze out every drop of adventure that he could. When I asked him 2 months ago his favorite place he'd ever lived, expecting him to say, "Yeah, Yakima," he goes, "The Republic of Congo," as we all would probably say. He worked white collar, blue collar, for-profit, non-profit. It didn't matter what he was doing. The goal was to take care of his family and to support his community. And that type of dedication, love, and humanity, I think, is a lesson to all of us. At every holiday and birthday, Grandma Bev would always write each grandkid a postcard. And that postcard would always tell us how much she loved us, would tell us about their lives, would check in on us. These beautiful, long written things. And then Grandma would just sign it, "Me too, Grandpa." And I think that was him saying, I say all of these things too, but I don't need to take the time to write it. So I'm up here, but any of the grandkids could be up here. And all of us know we love him, We miss him. We think of him often. And we want to carry on his legacy of integrity and honesty and love. And any of us can say it, but all the rest of us can easily just echo that quick. Me too. Thanks.
So I'm Lori. I was going to say I am the fourth daughter to Frank. Actually, he only had one daughter, but my sisters and I and my brother were family as well. When Jim first contacted Kathy to see if somebody in our family could speak, he asked if we would do, about 3 minutes or so. And I wanted to do it, but there is no way in the world you can talk about Frank in 3 minutes. Not somebody who had that much of an influence, that big of a presence in all of our lives. So you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to go longer than 3 minutes. So Frank came into Debbie, Kathy, and Kevin's and my life about roughly 58 and a half years ago. But his connection with Mom and Dad went all the way back to Butler University. And Mom says that she just remembers that he always brought joy and companionship and laughter everywhere he went. She especially remembers him in the cafeteria, surrounded by friends that were practically rolling in the aisle, laughing and enjoying some good jokes and good food together. After college, Mom and Dad left a few years later for their mission work here out here in White Swan. And Frank and Bev and what family there was at that time went on their way towards Belgium and then eventually to the Belgian Congo. But then a number of years later, when the Coburns had to leave the Congo, Dad decided to convince Frank that he needed to be the pastor out at the log church, White Swan. And that's when they got them to move to this tiny little podunk town in the middle of nowhere. When Dad went over to meet them, it was in the middle of the winter, a cold, snowy day. We went over to greet them, found Roger, who was about 6 years old at the time, jumping off the roof into snowbanks. And Dad was astounded, but Frank was just busy hoisting him back up onto the roof again. And he says, "Hey, this is my darling little boy, the one who loves swinging from the vines in the jungle." I think he found a replacement activity. I always thought that was astounding as well until a number of years later when my own 6-year-old son started jumping off the roof into snow banks and immediately thought of you, Roger. Our families were very close. In fact, we considered each other family, one big family, especially since all of our relatives were thousands of miles away, literally. And so we shared holiday meals and birthdays and special occasions together. Mom said that she always considered Bev and Frank to be close to her. In fact, they were as close as, if not closer, than her own sisters and brother. And as was mentioned, Frank loved to cook, and Bev was the one who liked to bake. And I can remember some of those wonderful delicacies that Frank cooked for us, things like ham that wasn't made out of a turkey, which was what our family was used to. Fried eggplant and fried Spam, things I had never eaten before and probably haven't eaten since. And then there was that time that I do remember the beef heart, and Mom made me eat it. Yeah, but I do think of Frank often. When it comes to some of those delicacies, I cannot see or think of a fried eggplant without thinking of him. He was a friend to everyone. He made friends easily, and he was very understanding and accepting of all cultures. He was at home with the natives out in Congo and equally at home with the natives out on the reservation at White Swan. And he was willing to go out of his way to do anything he could to help and encourage somebody who needed him. We all remember his great sense of humor. He and Dad were always telling jokes. Sometimes they were not so appropriate for our young ears, but we remember, Debbie says she remembers that either he had us laughing uncontrollably or rolling our eyes. Speaking of rolling eyes, I do remember him popping that eye out of the socket and rolling it around in his hand. But he once had me convinced that cows that walk along the hillside cows, had legs that were longer on one side than they were on the other side. So the cows could only walk in one direction. And they had to go all the way around the hill to get back to where they started. They couldn't just turn around. And of course I believed him because, you know, he was like my second dad. He wouldn't tease me. Sometimes he would, in his teasing, he would even break out into Congolese and kind of shock and surprise people, confuse people, and he would do this on purpose. Frank gave a lot of his time to help others in many ways. He was a scoutmaster for the local boys, along with Dad, out in White Swan. And Frank was very helpful and energetic, and he loved scouting. Harry, my brother-in-law, was one of his scouts. And Harry says he can't remember any specific skills that Frank taught him to help him get any of his merit badges. But he will never forget learning how to make a Congo monkey trap. As most of you know and has been talked about, Frank was very active, and he was an avid bike rider, riding across the United States at least 4 times, and the last time when he was 81 years old. And Mom told me that he was disappointed in that ride, and so I thought back and I wondered, well, was that the time that he got that horrible contusion on his back? And she said no, he was just disappointed because he wasn't the oldest one on the ride. And how many times did he climb Mount Adams? How many times? Just 3 times? It seemed like it was forever. But he was just all the time training, going up those terraces at Franklin Park. And one time, apparently, he took Dad with him on one of the trips, and legend has it, that it was a very, very windy day. And Frank had too much coffee earlier that morning, and needed to take a quick break when they got to the false summit. So he darted around behind some boulders and then reappeared a few minutes later with his beard iced over. I've learned a very important lesson in climbing today, he said rather sheepishly. Always aim downwind. So I remember Frank when my son and I climbed Mount Adams for the first time a couple of years ago. I remembered his advice, but I especially just remembered that I kept telling myself, even at all those times I wanted to quit, that if Frank could ride his bike across the country at 81 years old, I could get to the top of Mount Adams when I was 62. And so he inspired me to get to the top. When Dad died, Frank and Bev went to Debbie and Dave's house where the family was gathering. And Debbie said that after he hugged her, she said to him that he was Dad now. And he nodded and he agreed to take us 4 on as well. Frank and Bev looked out for Mom after Dad died, including taking her on outings to movies, to a trip to the World's Fair in Vancouver, BC, several trips to the Mariners games, spring training in Arizona, and they always traveled together and they roomed together. They treated her as part of the family, and she absolutely loved it. She took several occasions to drive over to visit when they lived in Marysville, and when her own mom died in Indianapolis, she was on her way to visit Frank and Bev, and so they took her to the airport and stored her car and picked her up when she flew back. And they'd always been there to give her support and encouragement. In fact, Bev told Frank that if anything ever happened to her, he wanted him to marry Mom. And he reminded her of that very often. Apparently they didn't get to get married, but Doug got in the way. When Kevin took his job in Mount Vernon, Washington, he needed a place to stay while Rebecca and their son Darren stayed in Kennewick trying to sell their house. And Frank and Bev invited him into their home there in Marysville, just like family. And he stayed there for 3 months, but he knows he could have stayed there a lot longer. They would have let him. And Kevin says, and the rest of us easily echo this too, that he learned so much about giving from Frank and Bev. He learned to laugh at himself from Frank because Frank was humble and caring, giving, and always willing to see the humor in his actions and in his mistakes. During the time Kevin was there with them, he loved to talk about all of the biking and his adventures and his work with FEMA and his desire to continue on to his later years, and Kevin said it was truly inspiring. Frank loved his family, and we had the honor of being considered part of that family. Now this comes as a warning. I have heard it said that one of the frequent topics between Dad and Frank was planning their funerals. They each had a few different ideas, but one that they both agreed upon was that they were going to sit up in their casket in the middle of the memorial service and thank everyone for coming. It's probably a good thing that we've already had the burial. Debbie and Kathy and I think Kevin as well were baptized by Frank. And I didn't have that privilege. I remember that I was very disappointed by that. But so for some crazy reason, being able to stand here today and talk about him makes me feel kind of complete and very honored. And to be able to express all of our love and gratitude that we had for this incredible man. We are all so much better for having had him in our life. And Frank, if you can hear me, we love you. Thanks.
For a number of years, Frank and I sat next to each other in the choir here at church, and one Sunday morning, Frank came with his eye patch on, and I didn't know he had a false eye, and I said, "Frank, what happened? Did you hurt yourself?" He said, "No." He said, "I was getting ready for church, and my eye slipped out and went down the drain," and he said, "When I get home, I got to take the drain apart and get my eyeball back." True story. I don't know about those others, but this one was true. I can attest to it. It's a song that Frank enjoyed, "Jesus Loves Even Me."
Thank you for the stories. Thank you for sharing. I picked out a scripture in Matthew 25 to read, but I'm just going to highlight it here. The story of the parable of the talents. His master was going to go off on a trip, and he brought servants in and gave them 5, 2, 1. That story. And
A couple of them, one of them just hid the money, and a couple of others went out and took that and then invested it and was able to bring back more. And the master, when he finally returned, he said, "Well done, good and faithful servants. You have been trustworthy over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." That's the piece that struck me in terms of Frank. There are some friends of Frank that are watching online today, people that he rode bikes with across the country, and they wanted to be a part of this. So welcome, and thanks for sharing. If I remember correctly, Frank was telling me that one of the traditions when you start a trip across country, at least with the wandering wheels, was to take your bike and you put the back wheel into the Pacific Ocean, say, and your bike was headed cross country. And then after all of the wanderings and ups and downs of getting to the East Coast, you would put the front wheel into the Atlantic Ocean to say you'd finished the journey. And nearly 3,000 miles or whatever it is there of deserts and of mountains, of valleys, of winding roads, of flat, straight roads through Kansas or Oklahoma or wherever, Texas, wherever it took you, wandering through the hills of the southeast to get to South Carolina, wherever it was, that journey. I've thought, and it sounds like, Jim, you didn't know either, in terms of where did this vision, where did this calling come from to wanting to be a missionary? I wondered, because at that time, and even as my childhood time, there would be missionaries who would come around, have been in Congo or in India or somewhere else, and they'd speak at the church at a potluck dinner, and you would hear the stories of what your finances were doing in terms of providing that mission work wherever it was. But somewhere there was a calling. I can remember the calling from me to go into ministry. He heard it in mission work. So after a period of time, a couple of years in the Navy at the end of World War II, he picked up that vision, that calling, and along with Bev, worked to prepare her in nursing, her in, was it construction and stuff that you did? I think it was construction that he did. But anyway, through all of the training, finally getting over to the Belgian Congo and serving there, on behalf of the church here to help people in that country as they were growing and working. Then that ended quickly because of the conflict and turmoil. Then getting wooed to come to White Swan. I remember Frank saying, it took me a few years to realize that these hills really do have some green in them around here on occasion. A little different than the Congo. Worked out at the log church, found a pastor, but it wasn't really the pastoral thing for him, but trying to make a difference in the lives of people there out in that rural area. And as Woods mentioned, seeing that empty dormitory, what can be used, and an experience in the White Swan area says, what about a rehab center for people dealing with alcohol? He had that vision and got it going. And I remember, now, can fill me in on this, and I may be wrong, but it's a good story. The brand Sundown M was originally the brand for the Yakima Mission or the ranch that was out there, correct? Okay. So that's where that came from. And that name, the Sundown M Ranch. got a master's degree. Because of his injury to his eye, he said, well, carpentry is not going to be my thing. So he decided to go into social work and got a master's degree. Worked for 18 years, Department of Social and Health Services. That's not easy work, but it's amazing work. How to touch the lives of others who are struggling, putting them together with resources that are needed to help further their lives. And after 18 years of that, retired, but he still wanted to get involved, so he decided to volunteer with FEMA. Disasters, and you put in the paper here, but 9/11 New York, wow. Katrina in New Orleans, as well as Guam and Virgin Islands, and there may have been others. Even though government be as crazy it is, and sometimes it doesn't work like it ought to, he was trying to work through the system of DSHS and FEMA to help people in need in emergencies, to get them the resources that they need. Now, isn't that ministry? About as real as you can get. So we never know what our lives are going to, how they are going to start and go once we dip that wheel in and we start the journey. The detours, the things that happen, the crashes along the way, the flat tires, the pulling that hill, those joyful moments of seeing the beauty around us, the lives we engage and touch, the opportunities to serve and to make a difference. What a journey. You see the track. It began with a calling. I want to do something to help in the world. It didn't go the way he thought. Didn't go the way it planned. But wow, the lives that he touched in White Swan, in Yakima, the Congo, New York, Katrina, Guam. And in the meantime, while he was based here, he touched us and has been told his humor, his laughter, his singing brightened this place. I still remember, let me tell this one, I told it earlier, playing pinochle. And Frank was at another table, and Bev was at the table I think I was at, and Frank was telling stories or something, and Bev was just over there rolling her eyes. Oh, golly, Frank. Love the guy. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've taken the gifts and talents and skills, and you used them. You've multiplied them. You've made an impact. Lives have been touched because of what you did. Well done. Yeah, it was tough the last couple of years of Frank's life. Shingles and all of that. It was painful. He was ready to go. But I know. He's ready to put the back wheel of that bike in the water and say, oh yeah, what a ride. What a ride. Let us pray. God, we recognize your presence in this place, that we have shared this hour telling stories, remembering the life of this one who loved us and touched us in so many ways. We pause to give thanks and to recognize his life was full of meaning and of love. He had a sense of calling to serve you, and he did. in many and various ways. And for that we give thanks, and we pause to remember that he is a model for how we can live. That in the twists and turns of life, there are opportunities to embody your spirit, your love, your grace, your compassion, to help someone else along this journey. So may we use this Frank as a model for us in our time on this earth, that we may so honor you. And we place him in your eternal care and keep him upright on those wheels. Amen. I want to sing a hymn that some of you may not know. It's kind of an upbeat piece, but I think this is a time of celebration, and this is kind of a summary of mission and celebrating the Christ and how we are called to live. So, turn number to 469 as we close off this service and share this song.
Thank you.
Now, following benediction, music is playing, the family will go out and we'll open the fellowship hall and continue sharing stories and remember and giving thanks. Let us now on prayer. We have been in your presence, O God. Now we go forth from this place with the memories and vision of Frank Coburn and his life fresh upon us. We take him with us as we take you with us into this life that we live. May you be with us on this journey, and may it be one that honors you. In the name of the Christ. Amen.